How's it going, guys? Just waiting for people to show up in.
Yeah, I want to chat. Like that, the chat.
It looks like it's there this time, right?
Yeah.
We're hoping this week we can chat with each other. If you guys could write something in the chat real quick to see if I can see for you guys. Last week we had a problem seeing anybody's comments. Still don't know if we're getting any comments.
Gotcha.
We're trying to mess with this a little couple seconds. We're trying to get the comments on. Live chat to replay. Alright, guys, so this week's topic is going to be about how to identify plant problems and what my 3 steps are to do when I don't know what's going on, how I'm going to figure it out myself. There's like a certain things I always look for in the room and in the plant, and I'm going to show you guys and talk about what I look for. It's kind of more like a detective type style. It's kind of what you got to be for. You got to know your room, your environment, a bunch of different problems that can happen. I don't think we're gonna be able to get the comments in. For some reason this week the comments ain't in again. That super sucks. I'm sorry, guys.
I'm gonna try to figure it out.
He's gonna try to figure it out while we're on here. We might end up switching over halfway through or something if he finds something on Google that lets us know. So first things first is when I find a problem in my plants, whether it's yellowing, purple stems, brown spots on the leaves, curled up leaves, curled down leaves, limping plants, I always go and start from the bottom up. So I'll go straight down to the root zone and I'll look at the root zone and make sure that it's been watered properly, that it ain't staying overwatered and not eating. If I've not fed it in the last 3 days and it's still freaking sitting there wet, something's going on with the roots and it's going to show up top by that time. One of my most craziest things I've had happen recently in all my years of growing was the fungus gnats actually did damage. They started killing off some of my clones. I usually take care of fungus gnats with a product called Natural or Micro Life, which is like a mosquito killer. They're living bacteria that I usually take care of it. Never truly had issues from the gnats themselves, like to the big plants. But I noticed that when I went from my rock wool, not my rock wool, but my rock wool to the cup, my solo cup, that a majority of my plants went from very healthy with roots from where they were at the cloner to all of a sudden they had this dirt, and like 2 or 3 days after their first water, they have roots in the cup already. They look like they need to be transplanted and stuff like that. But for some reason, the whole plant's dying. I couldn't figure it out in time. I lost a couple of strains. It was pretty shitty. Come to find out, the bugs itself were causing almost like a root rot system coming on. Like the stalk itself would get really mushy, and then like they would lay their larvae inside of the stalk, and you could literally see the larvae growing and eating inside your stalk, and it was killing off my plants because of how populated they were. It's a pretty crappy incident. It took me about 2 days to diagnose because I went through all my other diagnoses and couldn't find anything. I looked at the roots and there was nothing growing on the roots itself. The plant looked to be healthy root zone wise. It was definitely watered and taken care of. The temperatures in my room was right. The leaves actually looked okay when they were alive. It's just like you came in the next day and all of a sudden they were completely droopy. It looked like you cut a plant and it just wasn't alive anymore. And then it just kept getting worse and worse. And 2 or 3 days later, I couldn't bring it back to life. So when I finally ended up throwing it away, I dissected the whole plant itself. And that's when I found out that like inside the actual stalk, there was some little see-through worm-looking bugs. And when I went and looked them up online, they were fungus gnats larvae, which didn't really realize they could do damage like that, but it took like the perfect environment for it to happen. Because I overwatered it the day before, it allowed them to have extra moisture, which allowed the stem to be a little weaker than normal, and allowed them to be able to penetrate through the stem. Once they got through the stem, it allowed them to really mess up the ecosystem that it had from its root zone. It almost like I cut it from a clone to where it can't even eat from the roots anymore. So it was just a really bad tragedy. So the first thing that I like to do is always go look at the root zone, see what the moisture level is first, and remember when you watered it last. So you have an idea if it needs to eat, if it's been eating properly, and what the average should be. So the biggest note of finding any problem would be to make sure that you understand what your plants look like and how they act on a normal basis in the first place. So that when you come in the room, you already know there's something wrong. When I go from the bottom, if I notice it's like yellowing leaves or purple stems or like brown spots on there, you can easily go look up online to see what they might think it is. But just because it is that doesn't mean that that's the reason why it's happening. For instance, you can have nitrogen problems that look like nitrogen deficiencies. It doesn't mean that you need to add more nitrogen. It could be that your pH pin's off and that you've been giving it a wonky pH, so you got to test your runoff in order to make sure that, your nutrients is going all right. So what I do is I do a runoff and I'll test it with a ppm trenchant or a ppm reader or an EC reader, along with I'll test it with a pH reader just to check my pH and my parts per millions on my runoff. If it's extraordinarily high, then I know that my plant hasn't been eaten properly or I've been overfeeding it, which can lead to a lot of lockouts that look like deficiencies in the first place. So that helps you work and slow down that pattern. Or let me just pull some CalMag or something on it and then find out the CalMag's not really working until later on and someone tells you something else is going on. So what I always do is test and runoff. That's like my number one thing. Go check your roots, test your runoff. I check the room to make sure that nothing's been too hot or too cold or anything weird's going on in my temperatures or my environment. I look for bugs or mildew or molds that can start to take over. Usually they'll start from the bottoms or the insides of your plants, not quite on the outside. So you'll find more problems starting on the inside and lower parts of your plant than you will the outsides of your plant. So like I said, I'll start from the bottom to the top. And then once I finally diagnose what I think is going on, I then build an actionable plan in order to take care of it. So let's say it is a lockout. I notice that my ppms are coming out 2,500, 2,600 from my runoff. My pH seems to be fine. So I know that I need to go in there and flush it until the ppms come back down to 1,200 to 1,300 and get it back to a point where it can actually accept all nutrients again and not be locked out. Let's say it's a pH problem. I've had pH pens that were it was slightly cut, like it was on a Guardian, they call it. It's by Blue Lab. There's a little older one. The pH pen itself, you can replace them, but for some reason we kept putting it up there, and the way we were putting it up there caused a kink in it, and that kink in it allowed like a small tear inside the wire to where it was still reading accurately, but the moment it touched water and submerged and that wire got touched, your pH went completely off, and you won't even notice because you calibrate your pen and it will tell you it's perfect because it's not submerged all the way. But then the moment you stick it in the water, things were messed up. So thus far, if it wasn't for me to be able to test my runoff with that same pin, I wouldn't have noticed that, I've been putting it in at 5.8 is what it's been telling me, but all of a sudden it's coming out at 3.2 out of my bottom when I put it in without submerging it, because now it's not submerged on my runoff. So I ended up buying another pin and realizing that pin was just completely messed up, and that made my plants they made it go a little yellow, and they all curled in, like they looked almost like they were overwatered half the time when they really weren't. They were just really stressed out, and they did not like light. So with that being said, it comes down to you being able to check something on a repeatedly basis and make sure that your equipment's not the one failing. So once you X out the equipment's not failing, you then find out if it's a nutrient or a pH problem. If you find out it's neither of them two, then you got to go to what deficiency am I going with? I'm not overdoing you. I'm not underdoing you. Your pH is not messed up. So I got to find out what deficiency in my line's happening. So then I can go back to the quick book, which would be online, where you just type in, what your color distortion is or what it might be, and their deficiency guide, and you'll go, cool, it's telling me it's nitrogen, so I probably do need to add CalMag here. I'm not just going to wishfully think that it's CalMag issue. So that could all happen just by you breaking down the water that's coming out the bottom of your plant, and you be able to test for that. Now, let's say a plant's looking really, really sick. A lot of people don't notice this, but your plants will show signs of bug infestations before your eyes can catch the bugs, before you can catch the mildew. Your plant will show you signs. It'll start to slow down as it eats. And that should be a first tall tale sign for you to start looking for bugs or looking for problems of why it slowed down out the blue. No reason why a plant should be slowing down out the blue when it's naturally been eating every other day or every single day. There should be no reason why it starts to slow down. unless you overcrowded that room with extra plants and you like moved it out the way or something. But under direct light where it's naturally at, if it's naturally eating daily, it should always continue to eat daily or something's wrong with it. So a lot of the time aphids, not aphids, sorry, but thrips will cause your plants to want to do a bunch of mutations to your leaves. They will want to curl off to the side or curl up some, or some will cause like 3 leaves plants instead of like the full 5 leaves or 7 leaves. And there's these mutations, but before you even notice the bugs or these mutations, your plants will start to curl their leaves just slightly, almost looking like they're overwatered or something. And that's a tall tale sign that thrips are inside around. They're very small little bugs that'll be on the back of your stuff. Some fly around if they're full grown, but most of the time they're just like a little worm on the back of your leaf that you can see. But diagnosing these problems before it becomes a bigger problem is key to beating them. It's just like the preventive maintenance that I was talking about probably 4 or 5 weeks ago, in order to make sure that when a problem out comes, that you're not overdoing it and having something come in here to where you finally realize, yes, I got mites, but by the time you notice you got mites, it's webbed up. Your other plants all have it. Everyone's showing signs of problems. That's a hard battle to win. It's a lot easier to win a battle to go, cool, I noticed that there's one plant isolated that's having issues. It hasn't made it to the other plants yet. So I'm going to go ahead and fight that. But now this is where detective work will start to come in. And this is what I mean by detective. It's almost like forensic files. If you need to know where the problem came from, you also got to start to think of which plant shows the most signs. It's going to be on the same plant. They might think they're going to travel just because they want to. They travel because that plant's like overcrowded and it's a weaker plant. Once it starts to get weak, the plant will stop giving it the same nutrition that the mites are looking to eat from the leaf. So they'll go to a different plant. So for instance, if I have a mite issue and I notice it's at the back of my room, not the front of my room where people normally walk, I know that there's probably some type of hole in the back of my garage or something like that that's allowing bugs to get in there, because otherwise they'd be at the front too. So you can start to look at the infestation rate and know which one showed you the most sicknesses and which one was at there. So you can start to not only attack to fight the problem, but to prevent it from happening a second time. Same thing goes with mildew. Mildew ends up airborne really quickly, but your plants that are the most sickest will be the ones that show you the most signs. That can be due to bad genetics, that can be due to bad watering, bad practices, that can be due to bad environment. And this is why it's very key to go and look and find out. Don't just find out you have mildew and start cutting down, because now you haven't figured out what the problem was. You got to go through and figure out, was it a fan that shut off on accident? Did the fan break? Did the dehumidifier stop? Is there a water puddle on the ground somewhere I'm not noticing? You know, things like this will lead you to a point where once you finally figure that out, now you can kill that plant or get rid of the plant the way you need to and adjust the issue of the room. It's very important you figure out why it happened and not just take care of the problem itself, because then you're just waiting for it to happen again. So, like I said, is when your plants are starting to show you these signs of stress, which everyone sees it, when the stress happens, they all go, what do you think it is? There's a way to just go sit there next to that plant and start looking at bottoms of leaves, tops of leaves, making sure it's not a bug, it's not an infestation of mildew, it's not overwatering, it's not underwatering, it's not root problems or root bugs inside there. And then you start to go off to, cool, let me start testing my runoff now. Now that I know it's not the major things, let's see, it's a user error at this point. It's something I'm doing. So I'm going to figure out what I'm doing wrong by testing my runoff for pH or ppms, or temperatures of waters can start to cause this stuff. So really cold temperatures of waters earlier on can also cause pH adjustment swings. There's a thing on Blue Lab that explains the pH and the level of temperatures. Most of your temperatures be at 68 degrees to 70 degrees of water. Anything that starts to get higher or lower than that will affect the way that that pH pen will adjust the pH. So thus where you could believe you're giving it 5.8, but it could really be 6.2 because it was 62 degrees instead of, 70 degrees or 68 degrees, which could cause an influx of pH being higher or an influx of pH being lower than what it really is. And then you're just adjusting it, which can lead to problems later on. So it's very important that you pay attention to your growing habits. You make sure that you pH every time. You make sure that the water is the right temperatures. It's dechlorinated. It's not stagnant water sitting around with no air bubbler for a day or something like that, getting nasty, where bacteria or something's building up. You're cleaning your reservoirs you have your stuff in, because bacteria will build up and start to get in there. These type of things will prevent you and be able to make you ease at heart and go, cool, I know it wasn't me that did that part. Let's figure out why this is happening. What could be causing this? So what like I said, what I like to do is just go in there, look at the bottom of the plants, the top of the plants, and then I do that to each of the plants whenever I feel like something's going on in the room. Just because it's one single plant doesn't mean that it ain't going to start happening to the rest of the plants. And just because it's one single plant doesn't mean it will start happening to the rest of the plants. Some things can be strain dependent. Now they're, nitrogen intolerant. So when you start to hit it with nitrogen, the nitrogen is a little bit too strong for it because it ain't used to taking that type of nitrogen in the genetics. And now you have a nitrogen problem or a nitrogen toxicity. It's pretty simple the way that I go about doing it. It just takes time. It really does. It just takes time for you to go in there, look around, and rule out all the no's. It's better to rule out any possibility than it is to just assume it's not the reason until it's too late. So, did you ever figure out anything about this?
Mm-hmm.
What?
We may have to stop the stream and restart it.
So, hey guys, we're going to try to restart this stream real quick. He thinks he's figured out why the comments ain't working, so just hop back in a moment. Apologize about the end of the stream. We'll get in and have some questions, hopefully. Hello?